The stones are still warm from the afternoon sun when you press your hand against them. Stonehenge. You already know it. You've seen it on every list of ancient wonders, every documentary that begins with fog and silence. You were told the people who raised these stones are still here, that their blood runs in the veins of the people who live 20 miles away in Salisbury. That is what the textbook said. It is not what the DNA says. The builders of Stonehenge vanished. Not slowly, not peacefully. Within a few generations of completing one of the most sophisticated construction projects the ancient world had ever seen, they were gone, almost without trace. An AI just mapped exactly how it happened. The stones rise out of the English countryside like a question no one has fully answered. You can stand at Stonehenge today, in the same position a person stood 4,500 years ago, and feel the scale of what was accomplished here. The sarsen stones weigh up to 25 tons each. The bluestones, the smaller inner ring, were quarried not in Wiltshire, but in the Preseli Hills of Wales, 250 kilometers away. B-roll, aerial shot, tracing the route from Preseli Hills to Salisbury Plain distance graphic overlay. Researchers at University College London spent years reconstructing how that journey was made, over land, across rivers, through terrain that had no roads, no wheels in the modern sense, no draft animals capable of moving that weight. The people who did it planned across generations. They maintained institutional memory across centuries. They were not primitive. They were organized at a level that rivals anything Rome would attempt 2,000 years later. For most of the 20th century, the answer to who these people were felt settled. The ancient Britons. The ancestors of the modern English, the Welsh, the Scots. A continuous thread of humanity, building, farming, remembering. That was the mainstream position. It was taught in schools. It felt right. It was wrong. The crack in that story has been visible in the archaeological record for decades. The Neolithic period in Britain, the era that produced Stonehenge, Avebury, the Great Chambered Tombs, ends around 2500 BCE, not with a gradual fade, but with a rupture. A new material culture appears suddenly. New pottery styles, new burial customs, new metal objects, new everything. Archaeologists called the newcomers the Bell Beaker people, named for the distinctive inverted bell shape of their drinking vessels. But for a long time the debate continued. Were these new objects carried by new people, or were they simply new ideas adopted by the same old population? That debate is over. Ancient DNA extracted from skeletal remains across Britain, from teeth from the dense inner part of the skull called the petrous bone, from burial sites stretching from the Orkney Islands to the south coast of England, now tells a story that no pottery analysis ever could. In 2018, a landmark study published in the journal Nature, led by researchers analyzing the genomes of over 400 ancient individuals, identified the Neolithic farmers of Britain with precision. They were descended from Anatolian farmers, people from what is now Turkey and the Eastern Mediterranean, who had arrived in Britain around 4000 BCE and built a civilization here over the course of 1500 years. 1500 years of continuity. 1500 years of monument building, of farming, of cultural transmission. And then, beginning around 2500 BCE, within roughly 5 to 10 generations, replacement, approximately 90%. That is the number the genomic evidence returns. After the Bell Beaker migration reached Britain, the genetic ancestry of the Neolithic builders, the people who raised Stonehenge, dropped to approximately 10% of the British population. In some regions, closer to zero. The evidence suggests this happened not over millennia, but within a remarkably compressed window, a few centuries at most. This is where Grok AI enters the story. The XAI team trained Grok on published ancient genomic datasets covering hundreds of prehistoric European individuals, asking it to identify population discontinuities, points where the genetic signal of a population simply stops. What it flagged in Britain was not subtle. The Neolithic to Bronze Age transition here ranked among the most abrupt genetic replacements anywhere in European prehistory. Not a gradual mixing, not a slow dilution. In near total discontinuity, the builders of Stonehenge, the AI's analysis confirmed, do not have a meaningful biological presence in modern Britain. Early findings from Grok's pattern analysis suggest the signal terminates so cleanly that it resembles what geneticists see in populations that collapse, rather than populations that blend. The builders of Stonehenge were never the ancestors of the British people. The monument outlasted them by 4,000 years. The people did not. That sentence needs a moment to settle. a civilization organized enough to move 250-kilogram bluestones across 250 kilometers of Neolithic Britain without metal tools, without the wheel, coordinating labor pools across multiple generations, was replaced so thoroughly that its descendants today account for a fraction of a percent of the British gene pool. And here is what makes this finding genuinely unsettling. The skeletal record at transition-era sites shows no mass graves consistent with warfare, no epidemic signature in the bone pathology, no catastrophic climate event in the pollen record from that period. The replacement was overwhelming. The mechanism is still contested. The Bell Beaker people arrived primarily from the Pontic steppe, the vast grasslands stretching from the Black Sea to the Caspian, carrying a genetic signature that is now the dominant ancestry of modern Western and Northern Europeans. They were mobile. They herded cattle. They worked copper and bronze. Strontium isotope analysis in tooth enamel from Bell Beaker burials in Britain confirms that many individuals had migrated significant distances during their lifetimes. They were not wanderers stumbling into an empty island. They were a population in movement, arriving into a Britain already inhabited by people who had spent 15 centuries building it. What happened in the space between those two populations remains one of the open wounds in European prehistory. There are theories. The Bell Beaker arrivals may have carried disease to which the Neolithic farmers had no immunity, the same dynamic that decimated indigenous American populations thousands of years later, though on a different scale. There may have been resource competition severe enough to push Neolithic communities into demographic decline before any direct contact. There may have been social dynamics, intermarriage patterns, status hierarchies, land control that we cannot yet read from bones and pots. What the DNA evidence cannot show us, despite its precision, is the interior experience of what happened. Whether the last generation of Stonehenge builders knew they were the last. Whether the monument meant the same thing to the people who inherited the landscape as it meant to the people who built it. That is the counter-evidence the data forces us to hold. Genomics tells us the who and the when with increasing accuracy. It does not yet tell us the why. What Grok's analysis contributes is a new layer of confirmation. Human genomic researchers have known the broad shape of this story since 2018. What AI-assisted pattern matching adds is scale and speed, the ability to cross-reference hundreds of ancient genomes against thousands of modern reference populations simultaneously, flagging discontinuities that might take research teams years to manually identify. In this case, the output reinforces a finding that was already robust. The Neolithic British population was a ghost population, present in the archaeological record, present in the monuments they left behind, genetically absent from the people who came after. Their DNA did not survive the Bronze Age transition in any meaningful proportion, and yet the stones remain. Here is the living bridge that makes this history personal rather than academic. If your ancestry traces to the British Isles, England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, approximately 90% of your Neolithic heritage was replaced before the Bronze Age began. You are, genetically, far more Bell Beaker than you are Stonehenge builder. The people whose hands shaped those stones, who carried the memory of Presley Hills and Salisbury Plain, who aligned the entrance to the midsummer sunrise with an astronomical precision we are still mapping. They left their work behind, but not their biology. That is the philosophical weight of what this evidence means. Every monument outlasts its builders. Every civilization eventually is replaced or transformed beyond recognition. What is unusual about the Stonehenge builders is not that they were replaced, but how completely, and how the thing they built endures recognizable in precisely where they left it, while they themselves vanished with almost no biological trace into the silence of the genetic record. What we call Stonehenge is an orphaned monument. Its builders had no children who remembered them. The stones are still here. The people who understood what they meant are not. What did you assume about who built Stonehenge before this video? And has that changed now that the DNA evidence shows they left almost no living descendants?